Today we are talking about the importance of discovery. Arguably, I think the most important part of sales. You can't make a sale if you don't have a discovery. So I'm just going to kick it off and we're just going to talk about the importance of questions. So if anyone wants to jump in and just talk about why you think questions are important.
Actually, the first misconception I think that people have, we always talk about a sales process, right? And if you've looked at sales processes, you know that there's usually like a box in that process that says discovery. I actually think the whole sales process is a discovery process. And I think treating it as if it's only one step in the process where we check the box and, oh, we're done with our questions is like the biggest error people can make. Because from the very first meeting until a contract is signed and even beyond that, we should be asking tons of questions so that we better understand the customer.
For sure.
I'll jump in now. I think one of the biggest challenges is we work so hard to understand our solution and the compelling advantages around our solutions. And so I think we get really excited to tell people what those are. We talked about that a little bit in our last podcast. And the mistake that we make is sometimes we're pitching things people don't need. Sometimes we're talking about solutions that aren't a good fit. So I think it's really important early on in the conversations to validate if you're talking to the right person, if there's interest in the solution that you have, if you're moving in the right direction. Don't finish your sales pitch and have them go, oh, by the way, I don't even need that. Ask first, qualify early on in the conversation that you're moving in the direction, that you're talking about problems that need to be solved for that particular person. I feel a lot of times, especially in tech sales, but probably truth for all of you guys, like you're a solution looking for a problem. I think really we need to identify the issues that people are having quickly before we start solving problems that don't exist. So
you said something, at the beginning, and it just reminded me, a little early to jump into a story maybe in episode 2, but when I left Microsoft with my business partner and we started our consulting company, we were all about the technology, right? So every prospect meeting we ever had, we didn't want to ask questions. We walked in the door and we wanted to show the fanciest, most complicated, what we thought was the coolest tech. It was horrible. I think back at how poor of a strategy that is. We would just try to wow them with how smart we were on the product, right? Up until the day about a year in, where I went to do a demo, a whole executive team, like 12 people in a room, and I forgot the power cord for my laptop, and it had a really bad battery. And so this 2-hour meeting, I knew my laptop was going to last 20 minutes at best. So it totally changed my approach, right? Not that I thought it was going to be a worthwhile thing, but I went into that meeting thinking, okay, super apologetic, but I wanted to make it seem valuable. So I said, let's just talk. I'll ask some questions. I'll come back at a different time to, do the demo. So it changed my approach. And then for 2 hours, all I did is ask questions. I didn't get bogged down in the technology. I didn't get, make their eyes glaze over by just beating them over the head with all this stuff they didn't understand. And we walked out of that meeting, and I still remember what the CEO told me, and I still don't know if he was joking or not, but we walked out of that meeting and he said, that was the best demo I've ever seen. And the only reason I think he was serious is we literally had a signed contract late at that same day. They never saw a demo. And it's where it was like this light bulb moment where, to me, like, people don't need to see, 50 features of something. They need to believe you understand them, and they need to trust you. And questions are kind of the foundation of both of those things. So it kind of, was this moment where my entire sales approach from that point forward was, completely changed.
The moral of the story is you no longer brought your power cord to your demo.
Well, that first year, I wish I could go back and delete some of those demos, because people must have walked out of the room with their heads spinning, because we didn't really care about what they wanted to see. It's surprising we made it through the first year, to be honest with you. But once we figured it out, we were really good.
I love that.
I think something I'd add in, when you talk about questions, we're obviously talking about sales. Just think about even in your personal life, if you meet somebody, either a new acquaintance or somebody you've known for a long time, when do you feel the best when you're around those types of people, when you're around people? It's when they ask questions about what you've going on, what you have going on, what's going on in your life, what are you thinking about, what are you excited about, what are you struggling with? Everybody has that friend that you're around that just talks, and you're like, man, I need to spend less time around that person because they either give you energy or they take energy from you. So I think it's, again, like everybody loves talking about what's going on. They love talking about what they're thinking about. So, when we think of like, hey, yeah, your sales, it's just a relationship is what it is. There's really no difference, right?
And tonight I'm trying to listen more tonight. See, that's why I'm going last again, as I'm just listening, taking this all in, thinking of better questions. But Eric, it was a perfect example today. And probably because I was looking for it, because where you're looking, where attention goes is where you're going to find it.
Yep.
I had a demo today, and I hope they don't watch me or watch the podcast because it's going to feel really bad. I should have recorded it, because the first 15 minutes, I'm like, okay, here come the slides. And it was all about their company. I'm surprised we didn't get into their core values and what they do at their company with their core values, but it was all about them. And I'm just like, wow, this is, like you said, I've seen this before. I've done this before. I've been guilty of this before. Nobody cares. And I will say it unequivocally, I did not care about it one bit until the very end, is when he asked the question, and a few people in the room, we started conversing, and then it took off. But it was already too late at that point, right? And that's what it was just such a good reminder of what not to do inside of a demo, is they don't care about you and your company. To all your guys' points, it's getting those questions going so they can talk about themselves. Because when you're talking, it's preaching. When the customer's talking, it's gospel. It's gospel, and they're believing in what they're saying. It's just, how good are your questions? And if you're saying right now, well, I just don't get good questions, or they don't give me good responses, well, it's because your questions suck, right? You haven't worked on your questions. Let's just be honest, right? If you're getting vague responses and just surface level responses, your questions suck, because, again, PhD in stupidity right here. I got it, right? Like I used to ask, so what keeps you up at night? What problems do you have? And then wondering why they just weren't showering me with information, right? Like, well, I'll tell you what, Neil, this is what kept me up at night. I don't know you. I've just met you, right? It's like I wasn't asking right questions. It was mostly because I wanted to make that sale. It's what we were talking about before. It's that Tommy boy. Let me tell you why I suck at sales. Is I wanted to make the sale so bad that you could feel that. And when you become unattached, really unattached, and just don't care about the sale, that's when the questions become curious. That's when you start just being really yourself. It's like I tell my kids as they're getting older, 14, if you are into somebody, don't be that into them. Just be kind of unattached to the outcome, because that makes you want it more, because it's like, he doesn't care. He's just giving me information. And he's asking some really good questions.
Sales and dating. You didn't know you were going to get it all on this podcast, but we have it all for you.
Well, Abby can attest to how many times in our sales courses I talk about the comparison between sales and dating. I
thought you were just trying to get us to pay attention, honestly. When you first started doing that, I was like, he's just trying to get us to pay attention, a bunch of college students.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, relationship-based selling is about building a relationship with somebody, right? And that starts with, a relationship. It's it's about trust. That's the same thing with dating. So, I mean, going back to that comment, usually in the first few days of one of my sales courses, we'll talk, I'll bring that up. I'll be like, I'll ask students, what would happen if you went on a first date and they never asked you any questions? And everybody kind of agrees, well, it would tell me they're not interested. And I'm like, how we show we're interested in somebody is by asking them questions, right? That's that's literally how we build relationships. And asking questions is how we can even be empathetic. Like, you can't be empathetic if you haven't asked questions and listened first, because how can you be? Like, it's so foundational to just about every human relationship, in all honesty, and sales requires that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you guys have got me thinking, and I'm curious to know, you guys all have some more sales experience than I do. So coming in as a new grad, if they're entering their first sales job, I feel like a lot of new grads are always nervous that if they go into a meeting and only ask questions, they're not going to buy, because they don't think you know your stuff. They think that the purpose of a sales meeting is to present and show all, like Eric was saying, show all your knowledge. So what are some tips you guys have to get over that hurdle for students to realize that you don't have to show everything that you know, but asking questions might actually help more.
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts about even before you ask those questions, you have to kind of set the stage, right? I mean, I think at the beginning of that sales meeting, making some kind of comment and setting an agenda and saying, I have a number of questions to get through, so I can better understand how I serve you or how I can serve you. I think that sets the stage and kind of sets the expectation that we're going to go through a lot of questions. And in some products, you might be quite a few meetings in. Like when I used to sell ERP and CRM systems, I didn't want, I mean, after I was past that first year anyways, I didn't want to do a demo until I understood like the couple of features that were actually going to close the sale. And that's about all I wanted to show them at that point, because I could have shown them thousands of features. But until you understand which 3 or 4 you can show that actually matter, it's like throwing darts at a dartboard in the dark. You have no chance, or a very low chance of like hitting the right topic. So I think just set that expectation, and then you can demonstrate knowledge through your questions, right? If you're talking to a banker and you bring in terminology and you ask a question about how they calculate loan loss reserve or something like that, then all of a sudden you've demonstrated industry knowledge through the question that you asked, and therefore you're still asking questions, but you are telling them something through that question as well.
Mm-hmm. So
Agree with you.
internally, go ahead, Neil.
No, go, Anna, go. I'm listening. I'm listening.
Oh no, you probably had something great, and now I'm gonna miss it. I
Nope.
just to share internally, our process is we build what we call an account profile for the customers that we're working with, and part of the goal of that account profile is to understand the potential customer's environment or existing customer's environment, so we can see where we can fill in and be a resource. Neil, you actually said really well earlier to kind of separate yourself from your own needs, right? What's your agenda and what is your potential customer's agenda? And I think the really important thing that you're trying to do in your questioning is find out what matters to them. So before you pitch, before you get in, like the purpose of the questions is to understand where they're coming from and what you can do to be a resource. So, I mean, the thing that we always stress out about is that we have to have all the answers. We don't. We just need to find the problem. And then no organization that you are going to work for is going to put you in a situation where you don't have a lot of good resources at your disposal. The goal, some of the best calls, some of the best conversations you have, is you're just scheduling a follow-up with an amazing resource. Don't pretend to know something you don't. Don't try to go in and actually, I think we've been doing practice calls internally with my company, and some of the internal ones that are the best are the ones that go really quick. When you try to dig too deep into the solution, you kind of lose people. First of all, you're not the expert. You probably work with a team of experts if you're lucky. I do. Why would I try to have the engineering technical call that my engineers are going to have way better than me? I just need to qualify that there's a problem and that I have a person that's awesome. And when can I set up that call? And guess what? If I'm really lucky, I can keep having that conversation and I can find other problems I can solve. Lots of them. I might set 3 phone calls for follow-ups with a client on 1 call if I'm having a good conversation. And so I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be able to pitch something in there. I think you're trying to disqualify. So when we're doing our account profile, part of what we're doing is saying, oh, you just replaced your security camera system? Well, that's not going to be something I'm going to talk to you about because you don't need it. Then I'm going to go back and well, what does your wireless network look like? Is that something that I can help with? Are you doing anything with esports? So I'm kind of running through what our portfolio is, trying to understand where I can be a resource. Now, if I start out that conversation, I'm pitching my security cameras and they just did a replace, I just wasted 10 minutes of their time. They're annoyed, and justifiably so. So I think that there's a tremendous opportunity in like really listening and going back and forth. And one of the other tips I would tell you is make sure not to just, like if you're asking a question from somebody, don't go, okay, thanks, and go on to the next question. So you ask them a question, they give you an answer. I always tell people, listen to what they said, validate what they said, and then offer your solution in response before you switch over to the next one. So, oh, you just replaced your cameras? That's fantastic. We actually sell XYZ company. They're fantastic. If you ever get frustrated with your current company, let me know. Well, what are you doing for this solution? And then move on. Don't just go, oh, okay, next. Because you still want to make that offer, even if they had something else in there. Neil, now I need to do some listening. What do you got?
No, I was just going to add to you guys, because in the beginning, you always think it's all about the product, it's all about the benefits, it's all about the things. And you said it, Anna, when you first start, you're so excited because you're learning all about this cool product and you think it can help people, and you just want to talk about it. You want to shout it to everybody of what you've learned, right? I know the answer. I know the answer, right? Like in class, if I knew the answer, I was like, no, this never happens. I'm going to scream this out at this point. But what I would say, Abby, is questions are in every phase. Eric, you said it. It's in the beginning phase, it's in discovery, it's in everything. And if you haven't practiced those, and that's part of the fault of anybody that's training you, is if you haven't talked about these are our top 10 questions in outreach and cold outreach, here it is for our discovery, because these will get the answers that we're looking for. It's the sales process. It's actually part of the journey. It's the buyer's journey. And those questions are you pitching. And no one likes pitching, but that's what it is. It's just you have to have those questions so set up and so dialed in that they're leading the discovery, right? They're getting to the end of the thing because of how you're doing the questioning. And if you can get that good at your questions, woo, then like you said, you're not going to have any problem closing, because they're closing themselves because of the great questions you're asking. But the only way to do that is to really work on what are the questions that work inside this, and getting really emotional into that sale. And then they can start thinking, oh man, we should do this. In the beginning, you can't get too deep. You first got to have them realize there's a problem, right? If they have no pain or no problem, no sale. I mean, you said it, Anna. If they just got new security cameras, what are we doing on this call right now if that's what we're selling, right? Like so the very first step is they have to realize they have a problem. So what are the questions we're going to set up to get to that? And then next step, what are the questions that they're having issues? What's the deep problem they're really having? What's the business problem they're having? Not the surface level. Yeah, we're going to give you security cameras. What's the deeper problem they're having? That's a business issue that you're going to solve. And that's the next set of questions you're going to ask. That's what I love about questions. And that's what, again, it is part of the process, because that's just how you take them through the journey with the questions.
Absolutely.
The thing I love about, when I've thought about, over the 8 years I've been in the workforce, obviously in sales, it's questions. You've got sheets we build out of, hey, here's, questions to ask and all these different things. And I've always kind of taken the approach, and I'll honestly use the security camera example as the example. I don't sell security cameras, right? But I think really, like, what is the actual purpose of why an organization would want a security camera? Probably to reduce liability, reduce risk, right? Catch, hey, if there's things that happen, theft, accidents, like at the core of why would you want a security camera? There's a pretty good chance that's probably why. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes we get caught up in, oh, we'd want it for XYZ reason, or, oh, hey, the newest model has the tracking of the movement and this and that. But again, it's like, if you don't get the customer to really get down to the core of, like, why is this important? What does it do for your business? What does it do for you? Then it gets really hard, especially in like competitive sales, competitive deals, to really differentiate yourself. Because at the end of the day, whether it's, the product, service, whatever you sell, hopefully in most cases, your product is, or service is, second to none, or you're right at, with your peers in the industry. So then it really comes down to, like, again, do you understand where they're at, where their problems are, and what's important to them? And can you articulate it?
Mm-hmm.
I'll jump in with a question, because I have an opinion. I'm curious if you guys all agree with this, but when I used to manage a sales team, sometimes people would think, oh, I have a problem with closing, or I have a problem with handling objections, or I have a problem with presenting, right? And I look at all those common steps in a sales process, and when somebody suggests they have a problem there, most of the time I link it back to a failure in discovery, right? You have a problem closing because you didn't ask the right questions to understand what they were looking for. You have a problem with handling objections. Again, you didn't understand the customer. You didn't present the right information because you didn't ask the questions up front. Like, to me, almost every challenge, maybe not every challenge, a huge chunk of challenges farther in the sales process I always linked back to, a question we missed asking, that would have given us that information and made it, more successful down the road. Do you guys agree with that thought?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's kind of interesting because I think what it comes down to is we're trying to get into a position where we're allowing people to buy instead of selling to them. And part of that is like qualifying that they have that need. And I do agree. Every single issue that you run into is not understanding the situation. And I think some of that comes from fear. And we talked a little bit about that in our last podcast too. We're afraid of disqualifying someone out of we don't want to disqualify somebody. It's like we're afraid that we're going to lose this potential opportunity. Well, if they're not a good fit, they're not really a good opportunity anyway.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important that we step back from that, ask those good questions, and be willing to say, okay, this isn't a good fit, and walk away. And there's always somebody else. There's always another. I mean, if you're working for a good reputable company and you have a good solution to sell, there is always someone else to. Abby, what about fire trucks? Is there tons and tons of? I'm sitting here thinking about you going on there. So like, when you disqualify somebody in your new career, is there like another list you go down to? What does that look like?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's like any other business. We have competitors. We have, we're one of many. So there's fire departments everywhere. So everyone
Mhm.
has a fire department that they live in the boundaries of. So there's customers everywhere.
So do you have that fear at all about disqualifying people, or are you like
Um, Sometimes, yeah,
comfortable?
yeah. I think, at least for me, it's like I get so excited about the possibility of making that sale that I like don't want to disqualify it because I want to make the sale. It's almost, like you say the money blinds you. You're, oh my gosh, I can make a sale. This is gonna be great. Think about the commission I could make on this, and it's like, well, you're not gonna make any commission if it's not a good fit. So don't waste your time investing into it.
Right.
Trying to make it a fit. It's like putting a puzzle piece in a spot it doesn't fit.
Well, in most salespeople, by definition, most of us are optimists, right? We always believe we can make the
So
sale,
true.
and you almost have to be a little bit of an optimist, I feel like, to be a salesperson. Uh, and so I'm not sure we listen in those qualification calls early on. Like, we hear what we want to hear sometimes. Like, if we have a 20-minute qualification call, or whatever amount of time it takes, I listen and I really hear the things that say, oh, you're a good customer. And I kind of don't hear the things, between those sentences that suggest you're not. And if you can if you can remove that optimism and more objectively really evaluate, because the qualification process is huge. If you can cut out the bad deals or the low probability deals early on through good questions and good listening, you save so much time that then you can dedicate to the real opportunities that you can close, and your success rates just go significantly higher, and it all starts with good qualification.
I derailed a really good question you asked, Eric, and I bet Neil and Grant, as sales leaders, I 100% agree with what you said, that most things can be brought back to the good qualification, the good questions asked, and us actually missing that piece. Do you guys see that in your fields too, where we're missing that? And usually the problems is the discovery is messed up, and that's why you're having problems at later stages of the conversation.
Neil, go ahead.
No, you go.
I think for me, I mean, especially being in a high volume sales role where I've had, thousands and thousands of customers, conversations, I've gotten to the point now where like I already know what the objections are going to be. I know what the roadblocks, the hurdles. So to your point, Eric, if I don't ask about those things at the beginning, if I don't set it up and figure out, okay, how can I get around those types of objections, then I shouldn't be surprised when I go to try and close it, trial close. I get oh no, we haven't thought about this, or what are you going to do about that, right? And so, you can't obviously have every specific
Right.
sales process go perfectly where you're going to say, man, I never have to deal with objections because I already answer all the questions before they would ever get asked. But it's something, yes, you need to be aware of like, hey, if you feel like you are having problems throughout the process, it probably goes back to, are we asking the right questions at the right time to the right people, right?
I wish I could really disagree with you guys to put some controversy here. Like, no, you're wrong. But I'm not. I'm not going to do that because it's the truth is, and like you said, Grant, getting in front of the objection, right? You get better at that over time. Well, you do if you're smart at sales. Like when you get an objection, you're like, "Ooh, I haven't heard that one. That was good." I'll even compliment the person that I'm selling to. I'm like, "Wow, that was a great one. I didn't get in front of that one. Didn't see that one coming." Right? Like it's like then I'm going to go back to the lab and I'm going to go ask someone that's smarter than me, or I'm going to come to my sales group and say, "Hey guys, how would you handle this objection?" And then I'm going to pick it apart and I'm going to work on it. Or how would you ask a better question to get in front of this? And then I'm going to mold that question around it. And I'm going to make sure the next time I'm in front of that one when I'm talking to that persona that I've seen before. And I know that this feels like that last sale a little bit, right? And sometimes you got to fail though to do that, but don't fail 10 times, right? Like, again, you should, well, I've heard this before. What's my question going to be so I can get in front of this later? And it's the perfect example is today. I was talking to one of my reps, and he's going in for he's going in for his recommendation meeting. He's going to sit down. He's like, "Neil, we do current state and new state because I always feel, there's a gap, right?" And then Keenan, gap selling, that was a big shout out. I rip off a lot of people. I just read a lot of stuff. So anything you hear me say is from somebody else that's way smarter than me. But there's always a gap between where where they're at and where they want to be, right? So we just put that into the recommendation. He's like, "I got nothing. Like, what should I put in here?" And I'm like, "Well, okay, what's their buying criteria? What's important to them?" And he kind of just looks at me with the deer in the headlights. I go, "You need to go back out there and talk to Gwen again, right? Because you're not ready. It's not going to close because we didn't ask the right questions."
Mm-hmm. It is. I love what you guys both said. How important is that growth mindset? Grant, you're like, okay, I know what the objections are going to be because I've learned from it. And I think if you're early in your career and you're running into these objections and you're frustrated, don't be. This is literally a part of the process. This is how you learn. The most important part of the process isn't not getting no's. It's learning from the no's you get and evolving and becoming better and starting to understand what those conversations sound like. Don't take it personal. Take notes and learn and keep building on your structure and your conversation. And I think it's a little bit disheartening sometimes, in the beginning when you don't know how to overcome. Grant, you were talking about like, I know what it's going to sound like every time now. You didn't at first. And we all learned that the hard way. And it's funny. Sometimes people go, how do you know what to say here? Well, I've actually fallen down 20 times. And so now I know how to get back up. It's great. So I think it's just really important to understand that overcoming those objections and understanding, to Grant's point and to Neil's point, like where things are a win and where things are not is just a normal part of the process, and accept it and embrace it. And I think it's a huge opportunity for all of us.
All right, Abby, what's the next question you have for us?
Well, I just want to hear some do's and don'ts. So if you're talking to someone who's new in their sales journey and they're come to you as like their manager and they're like, "Well, I know questions are important, but how do I know if I'm asking all the right questions or enough questions?" Like, what would you say to them?
I'll take a slight spin on that, and I think it was Neil that earlier, you made a comment that it was a bad, something was a bad question, or gave an example of a bad question. Sometimes you hear that people will say, "Hey, there's no such thing as a bad question." And I'm not sure that's true in sales, right? Like you can ask a lot of questions, but if you're asking questions that are really surface level that you could have found on somebody's website, for example, then you're wasting time, right? So, I mean, there are some degree bad questions. You should go in prepared enough. But once you've done that, I would say the do, or once you understand that, a good do is, keep your questions simple, dig, ask a lot of follow-up questions, and prove that you're hearing them, right? So paraphrase things back, "Hey, I want to make sure I heard that right," and then repeat it, repeat back, because one, that verifies that you got the information correctly, but it also proves to them that you understand. And I think that's, a few do's anyways.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I would say, don't go in with an agenda. Check your agenda at the door, and do go in listening for ways that you can be a resource, and going in, and Neil and Grant, Eric, you guys, Abby, you guys, we all touched on this, but go in looking to really help solve problems for other people. And it's not about you. go in curious and open and willing to walk away if it's not the right thing. So check your agenda at the door and don't come in ready to sell and pitch. Neil, you got to have something for us.
Yeah, come on, Neil. I know you do.
The do's and don'ts. I again just agree with Eric again. I have told people like that was like you didn't do your research because we're trying to build trust like this, right? Because that's what it really comes down to. And they say sometimes it takes 7 hours to earn trust, and I get that because it's just like when you walk up to somebody, here comes the dating again, and say, "Will you marry me?" It's like, whoa, too soon, right? Way too soon. Probably more than 7 hours too, ladies and gentlemen. But that's what happens in sales is we just come out of the gate again way too fast. So how can we build that trust faster? Well, Eric nailed it. Do your research. Do a little research and then get 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. You've heard of that? Remember, guys? Remember the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon? There's always 6 degrees of who you know in that company. So whenever I'm going to go talk to somebody at a company, I'm going to go like, hey, Grant, you know this guy? He's at Microsoft and I'm trying to close him. Can you tell him I'm not, a douchebag? Can you tell him I'm a cool guy? Can you tell him I'm all right? Like that. You have to know because I can get my status up, right? I get a referral at that point. I'd much rather have referrals from somebody. It's so much easier to sell because my status has been raised. So how does your status get raised? We talked about it last week. What's another way you can do it? Your personal brand. If you're out there talking all the time about your product and you're the expert in the product, is it the first time someone's maybe listened to you? No. Maybe you sit down for the meeting and they've talked to you for hours. They know they've listened to your stuff. They've talked to you. They feel like they know you at that point. Then all of a sudden it makes it so much easier because your status is raised a little bit more. And then it just becomes so much easier to ask those questions. So it's just, again, do your research and then try to find something or a referral. And then it just becomes so much easier to build that trust because that's all we're doing. And that's what the questions do is it helps build that trust because we got to get to know each other.
Just kind of jumping off of something you said there, Neil, there's kind of a sequence to questions. I'm going to go back to your dating analogy. We just can't get away from it tonight. But, you don't, if you're on a first date with somebody, right, and you're 5 minutes into the date, you don't ask like the super serious questions of like, how many kids do you want to have, right? Like, whoa. I mean, I haven't dated in a long time, but, I'm pretty sure that would be a bad question and you're 5 minutes in. You start with, a little bit more of the softball questions. So, we talk in class again, one of the tools we use is something called spin selling. It's, fairly well known, but, we start out with more factual type of stuff, right? We're trying to just understand the basics. Then we look to identify a problem of some sort. And then we get into the consequences that might be a little bit more confidential or personal, but with every question you ask, you kind of build the tiniest bit more of rapport and trust and, comfort with the person to where you can get into the more personal questions, a little bit farther in. So I think there is a sequence to questioning that becomes important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think something, going back to a little bit we talked about of, you try to get to a close and maybe you're having problems tying that in with questions and something that I learned early in my career. And I'm sure it's a acronym everybody's heard of is BANT, right? Budget, authority, need, and timeline. And I think something that I have probably, obviously I've done not very well many times in the past is I will assume things. I think assuming authority is a big one. I like to assume that the person I'm talking to has the authority to make a decision, has the authority to write the check, right? That's a big area where, okay, didn't do the right questioning to really understand, who else needs to be involved in this decision-making process, right? And who else besides yourself? I'm going to assume that person is, but then who else? That's a big one, right? I think we're all great at uncovering needs because we have specific solutions to problems, right? So we try to uncover those problems. Another big one though is timeline. I think you had a great bit on LinkedIn today, Eric. You talked about, the deals you have and trying to run too many deals. And I mean, the amount of times where I've taken on so many opportunities. I've grown the pipeline so big that all of a sudden the quality of how I work with the customer, how I can like go sell starts to get diluted because the cup is
Right.
overflowing, it's spilling out, right? So like I just think there's so many things, and I'm sure we could even, talk about this in more detail of, I think that specific question around, disqualification and, oh, it sucks to say, hey, like get to a no. That's a hard thing too, but that's again
Yeah.
something that is just so important. And it's something that we as optimists don't like to think about, talk about.
No is a really powerful thing in sales, right? Because no to a question, or saying no to somebody is about pulling back your time to dedicate to other things. So like all of us having a hesitation sometimes of telling somebody no, or disqualifying a deal, like we all need to get over that real fast, because no is powerful. I mean, no is actually a really positive word to get used to saying, even though we think of it as a negative word. And I do think that's a great point there, Grant. I'm going to just, I know we're kind of getting a little bit towards the end of our time. I'd like to just throw in a tip or two. And if you guys have some, I'd love to hear them too. I guess that's kind of still the do's and don'ts, but one of the things I've discovered about questions, and I remember having coffee with a business owner. I don't know, it was probably 4 or 5 years ago. Didn't know the person, right? He'd reached out, wanted to have coffee. And uh, we sat there, and for an hour, man, he just question after question after question after question. I couldn't like get a question in. And I walked away from it, two things. First off, when I first walked away from the meeting, I was like, oh, that was a great meeting, right? Because he made it about me. I mean, I think I'm not sure what that says about me, but like literally that was my thought walking out of the coffee shop was, wow, that was a great conversation. And then I got to thinking, yeah, it was all me talking and him asking questions the whole time. But the other thing I learned from that experience was that the person that's asking the questions is in control of the direction of the meeting or conversation. And so if you ever feel like you've lost control of a meeting, right? Like it's off the rails and it's not going in the direction you want. Um, Grab back control. I mean, if somebody's asking you questions, you can say, Grant, I'm going to come back to that question in a few minutes, but before I do, I have a couple questions I need to ask. Boom. I just stole control back. And now my questions get to guide the direction that we go going forward. So I mean, that's just another way that I think questions are powerful, is realizing that when you're the one asking the questions, you're behind the driver's seat, or you're in the driver's seat as to where the whole meeting goes by the questions that you ask.
I think a tip that I would say, I'll use your situation, Abby, as an example. So a lot of times you walk in and you talk to somebody and they say, oh, just bought from your competitor. Rather than hanging your head and walking out the door, I would say there's an opportunity there, an opportunity for you to understand what motivates your client base, because they probably have the same needs and wants as someone else, and to understand what your competitors are doing well and what you can do well. So why did you buy from them? What do you like about them? What were the things that made you feel like that was a good, understand why they picked them so that you can work on adding those things in. You might have the exact same things in your portfolio, and those are the things you should be talking about in your conversation. And understanding what is motivating the type of persona that you're talking to, the people that you're talking to, is so valuable. So don't miss that opportunity. If somebody says, hey, I just bought from your competitor, to say, that's great, I've heard great things about them. What did you like what were the things that were like the tipping point for you? What made you pull the trigger with those guys? Asking for a friend so that I can better understand how to step in the door myself down the road.
Mm-hmm.
I always, in those types of situations, I always feel convicted that time is such a valuable resource. And man, if I would have had the opportunity to talk with that person before, maybe there would have been a different outcome. So a little bit off subject, but that's always something that I think about a lot, is how important is this moment? Pick up that phone, do the email, whatever. Again, off topic, but I just had to throw that out there because I think about that a lot.
It's perfectly on topic though, because it's so important to just keep putting yourself out there. You don't have perfect timing unless you keep trying. And so I think that's a fantastic piece of advice, honestly, Grant.
Yeah, the
You know,
One
success
tip.
of a rain dance has a lot to do with timing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'd say the one tip I would say is don't wait for discovery, don't wait for sales, don't wait for we can practice this at any time. The next time you go to a supermarket, when someone says how you doing, don't just say fine. We all just kind of get this blase, fine, yep, good, yep, okay. Ask them a couple questions. It will blow their mind. It is so fun, right? When they're like, I'm good, like, well, what would make it a 10 today? What if you're what are you at? What are you at right now? If you would say 1 from 10, like, oh, I don't know, 7. Well, what would make it a 10? And they're gonna say, win the lottery. I'm like, you won the lottery. You won the lottery of life. And then you ask them a couple more questions. What would you do if you won the lottery? And just keep going, ask them more questions. They will look at you like you are nuts, right? And then if you go to the coffee place, same thing. Ask for a discount, ask them more questions, ask them if it's been a busy day. When is the busiest time of day here at, and what time does that come at? What is the most popular drink right now, right? Like keep asking more and more questions. When you come home tonight, I'm going to ask my wife more questions, right? I'm going to be more interested. I'm going to actually give her eye contact, right? Something we forgot to do as we got older because we were just running with kids and going over the place. But the connection you start making with a person with that, it doesn't have, sales is so beautiful and so great, but we treat it like it's that greasy salesman or car salesperson that, that we all get a bad name. Don't paint me with that brush. Don't tell me that's me. There's bad lawyers, there's bad doctors, and there's great ones. Same with salespeople. And we should be doing it in every aspect because it is just great questions, and you should be practicing it all the time. Not
I
just
kind of want to follow you around for a day, Neil.
Me too.
I was going to say,
I want to be standing behind you in that coffee line when you're asking all those questions. I kind of want to see how that plays out.
I have a feeling that your 14-year-old doesn't love going places with you all the time.
I'm in a bit, Abby. I was told after the slumber party last week that I'm in a bit, and I will take that. So I'm a little bit like, I'm pretty chill, the girl said. So I'm in a bit. So I'm going to take that, guys. I'm going to take that. So
now I have to go Google that.
I actually have one tip that I've learned pretty early on in my days as a fire truck salesman as well. So one thing that I learned pretty quickly was that the relationship is just as important for the customer as it is for me. I think that I was so focused on, well, they just want to know like the technical things and they just want to know the pros and want to know that we have the resources to help them. But then I sat back and thought about it and I was like, well, I wouldn't want to buy from someone who just only wanted to talk about how awesome their company was and didn't want to tell me about their night or tell me about, what challenges they're facing or ask me about the challenges I'm facing. And so just in discovery, don't forget to put a little personal thing in there or, oh, that is a really big challenge. We've actually been struggling with that as well. And tell them a little bit. They love to get to know you and it's going to increase your chances of closing later on.
Oh, and I'll take that one step further because you just popped something in my mind that I got to squeeze into this, even though I know we're kind of towards the end of probably our time here tonight. But, asking questions isn't just about the answer that you get, because if that was the case, AI could do it, right? AI could ask you a question and capture exactly the words that you said. But it's also about understanding the emotion and the feeling, because that's usually a big driver in that, right? So if somebody in business, because business people try to be really non-emotional at times. So if they're describing something that's really frustrating, follow it up by labeling it, right? Say, wow, that must be really frustrating. And I've done that before. And it's like that, all of a sudden somebody like is willing to show you the emotion. Like, darn right, it's frustrating. And now that you've proven that you've gained a little bit of trust because you showed that you understand their feelings. But you made it okay for them to talk about it. And so look for the information between the words, right? Like I think that's, I almost think we could have a whole nother podcast about that, guys. Because I think there's a lot to, the nonverbals, the emotions and stuff like that. That's really easy to miss if you're not trying to pick up on it. Mm-hmm. And that's maybe where some of the best value in those conversations really is. But because I do think this is a topic that we could revisit sometime down the road, because it is so big. But anybody have any final thoughts before we call it an evening?
Just make sure you're asking those questions. Always ask questions.
Yep. If in doubt, ask why.
Exactly.
Just like a 4 or 5 year old, right? Why? Like, I think there's there's an idea there. All right, guys, this was a ton of fun. I look forward to our next one. We'll talk soon.
Have a great night, guys.